I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Today's episode marks the end of a journey that we've been taking together. The last few episodes, we focused on solitude, and that is a journey that has been quiet, it's been interior, and I think sometimes some of the guests has been somewhat uncomfortable about what they found. And over the last few episodes, we've looked at solitude from a number of different angles, as a refuge, as a reckoning, as a teacher, and even as a form of resistance. And to close that theme today, I'm speaking with someone whose experience of solitude perhaps goes deeper than most. Howard Axelrod is the author of The Point of Vanishing, a memoir about the 2 years that he spent living completely alone in a remote house in the Vermont woods. After a life-altering injury left him partially blind and disorientated in the world he once knew, Howard made the extraordinary decision to effectively vanish from technology, from society, and from almost all human contact. What he found in those 2 years is not just a story about isolation, it is a meditation on perception, attention, identity, and I think it's what we really find when we're not looking at a screen or even at a mirror. His writing is precise, poetic, and disarmingly honest, and the book itself was a great success. So today we talk about what solitude truly offers us, maybe what it takes from us, and why stepping away can sometimes be the only way to perhaps come home, come back to ourselves. Joining us right now is Howard Axelrod, and Howard, great pleasure to have you.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. What a great introduction.
Yeah, you are a writer, and so I thought I should put a little bit of effort into the introduction.
I appreciate it.
I want you to explain, I suppose, briefly, why you chose to take 2 years alone in solitude, and then I want to talk about what you learned after that.
I was a junior in college. It was the last week before finals, and I was playing basketball in the gym, and there was just a freak accident. I went for a rebound, and a boy's finger went into my right eye, and it went behind the eyeball and cut the optic nerve, which connects the eyeball to the brain. So I was instantly blinded in my right eye, and that the consequences or the ripple effects of that took a while to unfold. I mean, I guess they're still unfolding, but I went back to school after a week. I took my final exams. I just wanted everything to be normal. I wanted everything to be as much the same as it could be, to how it had been. And I think anyone who's gone through a before and after moment where, as you have too, where something in your life happens and afterwards cannot be the same as before. There are all kinds of instincts that happen in the aftermath. My instinct was to try to make everything the same and just go back to school, carry on with my studies, carry on with friends. And that it worked for a little while. So I finished junior year. I went back in the fall of senior year, wrote my senior thesis, and outwardly played the part. But meanwhile, because I lost vision in my right eye, the world literally looked different to me. I lost depth perception, so I would stumble sometimes on stairs, or I would spill over glasses of juice in the dining hall. I would crash into people on the street. And also just my sense of what was important, that part of how the world looked was suddenly an enormous question mark. What could I rely on? What should I be going for? What goals should I have? What's really important when something that you don't even think about can change in an instant? And also I was 21 years old. So those questions I think were already on my mind. How do I want to live? What's important? What do I want to live by? And I think the eye accident just made those questions much more immediate, like sped me into them, turned them all into capital letters, and also turned them into something that was very interior, because outwardly I looked the same as I always had. Once the blood and the swelling went away, my eye looked normal. But inwardly I felt changed. And I didn't quite understand what to do with that change or what to do with how I thought of myself. There were just all these questions that had kind of been there before, but now were just stronger. And in my everyday life, like I'd trip on the stairs, or I'd miss someone's hand when I went to shake their hands, or, just things like that were a constant reminder. So I carried on. The year after graduation, I was lucky enough to get a fellowship. I lived in Italy I was trying to be a writer. I wrote a very bad novel. And then I came back, a couple of years passed, and I was feeling more and more alienated, more and more like my outer life had diverged from my inner life. Outwardly, I took a year in grad school, then I was a teaching fellow at Harvard. So I was still on this track of whatever that track was, a kind of successful golden boy track. And inwardly, I was struggling. I was really struggling. And so finally at age 25, so, roughly 4.5 years after the accident, I decided to go to the woods of northern Vermont, to live alone, to get away from everything, so that stuff, those questions that were happening inside of me could happen without my feeling as though I needed to maintain the outer facade, which I had maintained and felt a real duty to maintain when I was around friends, family, and just anyone, like students I was teaching. So it was a way of getting away from the outer life and what I thought I had to present, whether I did or not, in my outer life, so that I could spend time alone with all those questions.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, that very few people in life have the opportunity to step back and really identify who they are, what they're doing. Once you get set onto the pathway of life and career and what you're doing, it's almost impossible to take a step back for more than a few days to analyze it. You just kind of get caught up in the system. But I think I kind of share this as well. Like, you reach a point and something traumatic happens or things change, and you need to understand who you are. So is that what your main goal was? You wanted to know, was it who you really are, what your identity was, or it was to try and figure out your next step in life?
At some point I realized, like, I need to deal with this stuff myself, that I'm never going to feel comfortable until I get down to like rock bottom inside of who I am.
And you said my only plan was to go to a place where my senses felt at home, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I just wonder how many people, and you've written in your second book, Stars in Our Pockets, about how often do people actually feel themselves, because we're just so distracted by what's around us. And I guess that's what you were trying to maybe get away from. You're listening to Searching for Heroes with Benjamin Hall. We'll be right back. I suppose the big question really is whether or not your 2 years of solitude gave you that enlightenment, whether it brought you what you were looking for.
Yeah, I think that one, to be a place where my senses felt at home, it definitely brought me that. A kind of perception that didn't depend on precision, that didn't depend on, this is exactly here. I know exactly in space where this thing is. It didn't depend on trying to locate everything. And I found then that I did occasionally have a phone conversation with a friend. Or
what led you to want to pick up the phone and call someone? Was it eventually, say, thinking, gosh, I need interaction? Or was it a practical, I need something? Like what made you eventually say, I need connection?
Yeah, so I usually wasn't the one to pick up the phone. The phone would ring. And I think the phone would ring because, I think part of it was they were concerned about me. But then I also think part of it was once they realized I was actually very content where I was. Part of it was a way to talk to someone who was out of society, like the way someone would go to talk to a confessor. Like to talk to me was to talk to someone who had no judgment on anything, no skin in the game.
Did you feel people were more open to you?
Yes. And that's, I guess we'll get to what it was like when I came back, but that hasn't really changed. Yes, that there was, like, a friend of mine was in med school at the time, and he was having a hard time with it. He was a good student, but he was he had a lot of ambivalence about being there. He had some other aspirations, and that was a hard time. He was in New York City, and he was someone who I had spent time with in the wood, in wild places. We'd spent a summer in Alaska together. And so I remember he was so open talking about his experience in New York City and what it was like walking around in Manhattan. And I remember my listening really felt different, I think, as a consequence of spending all that time walking in the woods, listening for birds, because I found myself listening to him the same way I would look for a chickadee in the woods. I wouldn't, if he was starting to say something, I wouldn't do what I probably would have done before that, which is try to search for, okay, what's his point? What's he getting at? What's he trying to tell? It was a much slower kind of listening. And I would kind of pan back and let my hearing go soft in the way I let my eyes go soft in the woods to kind of wait for movement, to sort of see what's the arc of what he's saying. What's his flight path? Where is he kind of starting from, and what is he saying? Where's it moving? And I also found I got images for everything, maybe because I didn't have a lot of TV images or coming in. Everything he said, I pictured. Like I was seeing it like I was watching a movie because I didn't have any kind of entertainment. So like when a friend would call, for me, it was like probably the equivalent now if I would go into like a big screen theater and actually have surround sound, and just to hear someone, a human voice saying, I was walking around Central Park and I saw a pretzel vendor and the pigeons, immediate pictures, immediate memories of, using memories from when I was there, and immediate kind of tapping into the tone and sort of what was being said below the story. So then I could respond in a way that was, that sort of really what he was telling me.
It's fair to say, I wonder then, for all the rest of us who live in these worlds which are non-stop, we're surrounded by cities and things that are happening. Although we're surrounded by so many things, perhaps we're picking up less. Perhaps we are so consumed with different things. Maybe we don't actually get to appreciate life as much because there's too much going on around us. And maybe you started to see some of the beauty in life.
Absolutely. I mean, to both points, like for seeing beauty in life. Yeah. I mean, every morning walking out from to call it a garage is really a glorification. It was like just where I kept the wood. I had 6 cords of wood and the roof was canted. And, but every morning I still think about that sometimes, what it was like to walk outside and the air was so fresh, and see the snow if it had snowed. And I would have already made the fire at that point. So to smell the wood smoke, from the wood stove, and to see where the sun was rising that morning, versus where it had risen the morning before. I was very aware of how time was passing. It was, it's hard to describe just how exciting, vivifying, what it felt like to just step outside in the large boots and my snow pants, and if it was 15 below or 20 or whatever, and breathe in the air and start walking. The most basic things can be so pleasurable, or to have a cup of tea. Like I was never eating or drinking and doing something else at the same time. So I had nowhere to get to. I had nowhere, no appointments. It was, in this way, it's so luxurious, like more luxurious than any, 5-star hotel you can imagine, to sit with a cup of mint tea with the fire going behind you and their windows in front looking out at the woods, and to drink it as slowly. People have said to me afterwards, so what did you do with your day? How did the hours pass? And I would say I'd wake up, make the fire in the wood stove, go for a walk, make tea, maybe take a nap, make some lunch, go for another walk. But time just slid by. Like I didn't.
Did you set yourself goals? Like, did you say when you went out there, I want to achieve this or this, I want to figure out who my real self is? Did you set any kind of goals in your mind when you began?
No. In this way, it was very un-American. Like the classic American autobiographies say Benjamin Franklin, it's like the list of, this is how I'm going to improve myself. And in The Great Gatsby, when they go into the background of how Gatsby kind of invented himself, he has the same thing. It's like a list of, I'm going to do calisthenics, I'm going to do practice. It was very un-American. I had none of that. I had a need, like I was saying before, to be alone and to confront or to deal with whatever was inside. But my method, the approach was vague to me. Like I just knew it was intuitive. I was finding things. Like I knew as I was walking on those mornings, which I did every morning, I wanted to walk and not have any thoughts in my head. Because as I was walking, I noticed if I was thinking, I wasn't observing as well. I wasn't seeing as much. I wasn't, I was in my head. I wasn't seeing what everybody now calls, being present. So what I started doing was I would walk. And then if I found myself thinking about something, I would just stop walking. And I would wait until my mind went quiet. And then I would start walking again. And I don't know, it was just like basic things like that and then I would find with my attention that it wasn't like, oh, look at the snow here. Like, look where the sun is this morning. Or it was more just like, I became attuned to what is attracting my attention. Like if I have sort of no will in where I direct my attention, what pulls me? Like what is attracting what seems beautiful? What am I listening to? I was just following whatever led me forward.
It's so interesting then, because I was thinking, and I was going to just ask sort of, how did it change how you saw yourself? What did you learn? But you were trying almost to stop actively learning. Were you trying to just see what it was like to be totally cut off, even mentally?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I wasn't reading much. I stopped reading. I wasn't really writing. And I'd spent a lot of time doing both those things before that year. I guess cut off intellectually, but not, sensorially. Like I was very aware of my senses and sort of what I was taking in as an animal, sort of just as like a human animal. Yeah. And how and I think I wanted to get down to that first. Yeah. So to strip away everything. I think part of it too was about will. It wasn't so much an absence of like mind or whatever, intellect, although that was probably part of it. I think I was really looking for an absence of will. Like, I think part of why I felt guilty or why I felt the accident was my fault in some way, this is like the shame part coming. This is the shame undertow. I think had to do with the feeling of like, oh, I'd flown too close to the sun. I'd wanted too much. I hadn't wanted to kind of fit into the family framework. I'd wanted to be a writer. I'd wanted to be an artist. I think I'm sort of, this was a message I'd gotten in various ways from various people, like, oh, you're too big for your britches, or you're hubris. Like I had a classical education. I'd studied myth. The punishment is generally, if like something like this happens, the punishment is generally for hubris. It's not, so I think I had that. There was an undercurrent of that in me, like, oh, maybe I was too cocky, or I wanted too much, or I was getting I dared to go outside of the frame I was supposed to stay within. And I got punished for it, And so on a rational level, I didn't think any of that. But on some subconscious level, I think that was definitely in there. And, which is a very, painful feeling. And none of which I think is actually true, but I think that's what I felt. So then walking in the woods or living this way is like, okay, I will abandon that part of myself that got me punished. Like I'll abandon the will. And, a logical response is, okay, so if you feel you were getting punished for going outside of the frame or daring too much, or then you like completely go outside the frame and live like barely even like a human existence. So it's not like it wouldn't hold up in court. But I do think that's part of what I was doing, like get away from the will and sort of see what, like just as a human animal, really like, who am I? What pulls me?
Yeah. At the end of this, of course, I want to ask why you stopped at 2 years, why you decided to end it. But did you find what you wanted to find? Did you get what you were hoping to get?
I think so, but I think it didn't come in, the package I thought it would, or it didn't quite work out the way I thought. But I think part of that identity that I was looking for, and I didn't know this framework in advance, but it might have been helpful. It is like William James, who's the father of American psychology, breaks down the self into these three parts. The physical self, which is your body. He includes your clothes and your possessions, but really it's like your body. Your social self, which now I think most people consider like, such a, like basically the whole self, which is how we interact with other people, what other people think of us, how we present to, like that's how you identify. That's all social self. But then the third part, the deepest part is spiritual self. And that he had a very hard time defining that. But the spiritual self was really the part of you that is unbidden. It's not dependent on where you live or what race you are or what gender, and it's not dependent on the way anybody responds to you. It's just what in you, he described it as like a gatekeeper, like what in you responds to the world. What are you moved by? And you could say some of that has to do with your social self, but there's a part of you, I think I was trying to get down to that. Like the part of me that isn't, like when you're a teenager, it's like, oh, what? If I listen to this band, how's that going to make me look? Or especially now, it's like, how, if I go on vacation here, how's that going to make me look on Instagram? Or if basically everything people, especially for young people, everything is some version of like, does this make my ass look fat? Like, how do I look in front of the Mona Lisa? How do I look in front of, and I wanted to get down to that thing of just like, what do I respond? Like maybe what I respond to is something I would never have guessed, or maybe it's this thing, or, like really what is that central part of identity. So then I can then build the social self, the external, all these other things on top of it. So they all kind of align, so I didn't feel alienated from other people, from myself. That was the hope, I think. And I do think I found that. Like I felt so comfortable while I was there for a while. And then I think what I found was part of loneliness. I've listened to some of your other podcasts about solitude, and there's that question of loneliness, and the conventional wisdom is, loneliness. It's like everyone says you can be lonely in a city, and then you're not so alone. Like you're not as lonely when you're alone, and I think that's very true. But a big part of loneliness is a feeling of whether you belong or not. Like if you're with a group of people and you feel like you don't belong, you're going to feel lonely. And if you're, alone somewhere, but you feel like you belong to the woods or, the place you are, you won't feel lonely. And I think a key part of belonging for most people, usually, and I had this beforehand, before I went to the woods, was a feeling of like, oh, I fit in with this group, or I'm a part of this school, or I'm a part of this, which is fine and nice. And or I identify with this, whatever. But I think after the accident, I felt so solitary, just even when I was walking around college, I felt so interior. And I'd always kind of had that, but now I really had it. And so I think what I finally found, and this was the thing that was, made it okay to come back, was that the belonging wasn't a function of like, oh, I'm part of this group, or I'm part of this neighborhood, or I'm part of this thing. It was a function of having gotten down to some like essential solitariness, of having taken off the lenses that, had been given me for how to see the world or how to look at things. So I could really see things kind of from inside myself. And then that my sense of belonging was actually rooted in that, like rooted in my feeling my own solitariness and realizing everybody's alone at some level in this way, however much they acknowledge it. And if you talk with anyone long enough, you can feel like, wow, this person is not like any other person in the world. This person is distinctive and special. And my sense of belonging could come from feeling that in myself, and then feeling it in the people, whoever, people I talked to on the phone, or people I would see when I drove through town, and then when I came back, if things are going well, I can feel that with everybody, anybody. And that like, oh, I belong to the human race, basically.
It's just that's absolutely so fascinating, because I think I do the same quite often as well. And for times you have things going to your mind, and you're thinking that it's just you. And quite often I walk down the street and I just start looking at other people, and I say to myself, I know that person has something going through his head. Yeah. That lady has something going through her head. We are all, each and every one of us, and it's not just about you. In some way, it's a shared complexity, like there are shared trauma that everyone has, and once you all realize you've got it, it kind of lifts. It's amazing. You're listening to Searching for Heroes with Benjamin Hall. We'll be right back. I suppose we've got to move forward to your decision to finish being alone and in solitude, and what made you decide the time had come, and the big question after that, what was it like re-entering the world as we know it.
Yeah. So the decision to come back wasn't entirely like a glory. I crossed some finish line. I came here in order to figure out how to come back. I didn't come here to stay here. And I need to, then almost felt like something in some sci-fi movie or something where it's like, don't stay too long in the, like you go into the temple and find the thing, but then you have to leave. And it sort of felt like that, like the door is closing. You kind of found this thing that felt in a way magical or mystical. If you stay too long, the door will close. Like I'd really liked a lot of my life before the accident and before. So like I missed some basic, like I missed watching college basketball on TV. I missed seeing friends. I missed my family, I missed things.
Mm. It's difficult to know whether you gained getting lost, and you probably almost doing a bit of both. And it was fascinating.
Yes, some of both. It was not, that's why I wanted to make clear that it wasn't just like, oh yeah, I kind of crossed the finish line and I could feel it, like I've achieved my goals. And it's a lot more complex than that. And I was, at the same time I was gaining a lot of things, I was also there was also a kind of danger of dissolution and of losing relation, also like connection to family. And there are costs, and I certainly, the cost for friends and family members who were, especially my parents, who were very worried about me. So I think I was aware of that too. So then it was time. It felt like it was finally time to come.
So what was that? What was the move? What and where was the move to?
Well, that was not easy. So like the move into the woods was far easier for me than the return. Far easier. The return was jarring. It felt like, I heard an interview not that long after I was back with this astronaut, and he was talking about like how it felt on his body when he came back from space, the contracting of the spine, and like how he was in the shower and just the pressure of the water on his back felt like hurt. It felt like needles. It kind of felt like that. Like everything felt too fast, too strong, too big. I came back. I spent a little time in New Hampshire first as kind of like a halfway house mid-station, which helped. And then I was back in Boston, and I like to walk around Harvard Square, which with Rand had felt so comfortable. I had to put earplugs in just to walk down the street. It was so loud. Like when you're in the woods, there's nothing you don't want to hear. Like your senses really open. You talked about this before, if we're walking down the street and we're so busy, like, are we missing out on stuff? And the thing is, you have to miss out on stuff to walk down a city street. Like, it's kind of incredible to me how your mind just knows to filter stuff out. So like anyone now, you can walk down a city street, there's all this stuff going on. You're talking to a friend, you focus on what your friend is saying, you're blocking out a million other things, and you have a conversation. I could not do that when I came back. Like not remotely close. My senses were just open, and the filters, it's like an equalizer on a stereo. Everything was turned all the way up. So I couldn't modulate. I couldn't pay attention to, the thing I wanted to pay attention to, because I was also hearing a door slamming and a siren coming and a dog barking, and I was hearing everything.
Has that left you to a certain degree? Because I had something similar when I left hospital, and I was in this totally new place, and, you were redeveloping yourself and your new mind. And but after a few years, you sort of just head back into the normal life. And I don't feel I am as open as I was back then. Have you found that you have slipped back into a far more normal way and perhaps lost some of that clear-eyed vision that you found?
Yeah, for sure. I do. I think it's inevitable. It's sort of like, what's your default setting, and then so when I came back, it was markedly different. And now, it's drifting back more towards, I'm still far more aware or attuned to other people, and especially to other people's pain, than I was before that time. So I can say that I'm not, or like for you, you're saying maybe not as clear-eyed or as open as you were after that time in hospital, but still like more clear-eyed and probably more aware than you were before all this stuff happened.
Yeah. So you mentioned default setting, and actually the question is, what is our default setting? If you look back at the millions of years that, we've been on Earth, is our default setting us in a city, surrounded by current society, or is our default setting, as you found it, human nature, far more simple? I mean, have we lost our default setting? Is it incorrect that what we've built around us? Is that not our genuine natural selves?
I don't know. I'd hesitate to say that. Like, I know I'm much more comfortable. I know where I'm more comfortable, but I think what most people would say about the basic thing about being human that has shown up over all the millennia is that we're adaptable. I mean, that's that's the primary. We adapt, and that comes up somewhat in a second. But just how the basic structure of our brains has not changed in 40,000 years, which is kind of crazy given how much our lives have changed over 40,000 years. What's changed is that what allows us to adapt is neuroplasticity. Like, our brains are incredible at adapting to, there's learning how to do new things and make new things and then use them as tools. And like, we are the ultimate tool builders. And those things change how we live. And I guess it's really a question of like, what do you value? What traits, cognitive traits and just human traits do you value? And then what environment will support those traits? So like, if you value empathy, if you're someplace where everybody's on their phone, it's going to be harder to listen to other people. If you're in the woods, that might contribute to a higher level of attention, more empathy if you have people with you. And I value those things. So there are people who value speed, efficiency. There's certain things that we're kind of taught to value. And it depends.
And I suppose just to bring it full circle back to the idea of solitude, do you think that people should spend more time by themselves? Do you think that your experience, not as extreme as the 2 years you took, but do you think it is essential that people sometimes take that step back to try and figure out who they are? Or again, just it depends on the person. Maybe some people do need it, some people don't need it, but there's some people forgetting who they are without that time alone.
Yeah, I'd hesitate to prescribe, but I like Dr. Solitude, take 2 weeks alone and call me in the morning. But I do think that if someone's feeling that divide between their inner life and their outer life, or between their outer life and the environment they're in, then there's a real need to find something that can connect those things for you. And whatever it does that for you. I mean, if it's solitude, that's great. If it's, talking to a friend who really understands you and can listen in a way that helps you connect those two things, that's great. Or spending time with animals, or, whatever it is for people. For me, it was really solitude, and still is. I still need a lot of time alone. But I guess that's the thing I would encourage people to do, is try to find a way to get yourself to do things that help you connect what's inside of you and what's outside of you. I think that's very important.
Yeah. Well, Howie, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your books. They're fascinating reads, and I would advise everyone to go and read them. I think that even if you don't have the time to spend by yourself in solitude, even reading and hearing and listening to other people's experiences gives you a little bit of semblance of the benefits of what it could be like. So thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to meet you, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Well, that was Howie Axelrod, and fascinating to hear both the pros and also the cons of being alone in that sense. And just listening to him reflect on what it means to vanish, which is what he effectively did, and then what it means to return. His time in the woods, it gave him no guarantees at all. No revelation arrived with thunder. But as you just heard, something changed in those 2 years, something really essential about how he sees, how he listens, how he lives, and how he saw himself. And there's no doubt that it was positive for him, but it took him some time to realize that. Fascinating to hear how he reached a moment where it was either totally dedicated to that and that was it, or he had to pull himself away from it. And maybe that's the thing about solitude. Maybe there comes a point where the solitude takes over and it becomes too much. And at that point, it becomes dangerous. Everyone we've spoken to had that finish line. But I think that Howie's was fascinating because he put himself in that position and he was running away, and then he decided to come back again. So as we close this chapter on solitude, I think maybe the lingering question could be this. It is, what might we hear if we allowed ourselves a little more quiet, if we allowed ourselves time to really reflect, really to cut ourselves off, just temporarily even. I'm not saying it's 2 years in the woods, but a pause, a breath, a moment unplugged. And I think that all our guests who have spoken on solitude share a belief that there was something positive in it. In our next episode, we begin exploring forgiveness, not as a moral commandment, but as potentially a human dilemma. What happens when we want to forgive, but we can't? What if we are asked to forgive too soon? Or what if forgiveness becomes a form of forgetting? So until then, we have many guests coming up who will talk about differing degrees of forgiveness, whether you should, whether you shouldn't. Thank you for being with us in the stillness of these few episodes of Solitude. I'm Benjamin Hall. This has been the final episode in that series and that theme. Thank you. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.